The soft light of dawn spilled into the narrow lanes of the medieval town, painting old stone walls in shades of honey and gold. Mist curled between timbered houses, clinging to the morning air and wrapping everything in a hush. Lanterns sputtered on their posts, small flames sinking away as the sun rose, releasing the world from its nighttime secrets. The assassin moved silently through the wake of the vanishing darkness, feet muffled by uneven cobblestones and patches of dew-soaked moss. The homes along his path were shuttered and still, thin threads of smoke rising quietly from chimney pots, promising warmth and breakfast within. The only sounds were distant, soft voices of early vendors, the faint clatter of hooves, the muffled bark of a dog behind some wooden gate. The assassin pulled his hood lower, blending into the slow rhythm of waking streets. His routine was deliberate, measured with the patience that years had carved into him. Every morning followed the same arc, a careful journey to the edge of the bustling square, weaving between carts laden with bread, barrels of apples, clouds of flour that drifted on the gentle breeze. He paused beneath the crooked eaves of a blacksmith's shop, letting the metallic scent of iron and the gentle ringing of hammers fill the air. At this hour, his work did not demand violence or pursuit, only quiet calculation. With empty hands and an unhurried step, he watched the town stir itself awake. Children chased after chickens in dusty courtyards, while market women arranged their baskets with repetitive care. Above, window shutters creaked open, spilling more sun onto the cobbles below. For the assassin, this slow unfolding was a comfort, the normalcy of others grounding him in a world where he rarely belonged. In these quiet moments he found a kind of peace that settled deeply into his bones, as golden and gentle as the morning light itself. The morning air was thick with the scent of earth and dew, drifting low through the narrow alleys and across uneven stones. Every step brought with it a whisper of damp soil, mingling with the faint tang of ash from last night's dying fires. Above, thin fingers of mist curled around the gables and twisted along the gutters, blurring the line between shadow and sunlight. As the assassin pressed forward, his boots picked up cool droplets from the moss and left behind shallow imprints and patches of soft loam. Not far off, a chimney smoked gently, its breath winding upward with the aroma of charred wood and the lingering promise of warmth. Between breaths, he caught other notes: distant grain, wildflowers near a garden wall, the bracing sharpness of iron and singed leather from the blacksmith's open window. In this tapestry of fragrance he felt at once both hidden and entirely awake, each new note threading a quiet comfort through the solitude of his routine. At the edge of the square he paused, letting the smells and sounds of the waking marketplace drift over him. Here the stone still held the memory of night, cool and slick beneath his worn soles, even as the promise of day crept steadily closer. His hands lingered in the folds of his cloak, fingers brushing the hilt of a small dagger, a silent reassurance, a habit honed by years of repetition. The day's first market stalls creaked as women raised their canvas flaps, their hands dusted in flour or apple skin, voices lowered in soft conversation. An old man swept the stoop of a bakery, sending breadcrumbs tumbling into the gutter for sparrows to claim. Somewhere, water splashed from a bucket as a girl scrubbed worn cobblestones clean, her laughter muffled by the door. The assassin watched with quiet detachment, breathing in the mingled smells of yeast and smoke, soil and morning air. It was in these gentle, unnoticed moments that he found his rhythm, each sense sharpened by the world's slow unveiling, surrounded by life's humble rituals as the day unfurled in peace. A gentle breeze traced its way through the sleepy town, slipping between crooked homes and fluttering thin linen curtains that hung in open windows. The movement was soft and unhurried, carrying with it a promise of freshness that made the pale morning glow seem brighter. Curtains billowed inward, revealing glimpses of humble interiors, rough-hewn tables, clay cups, the quiet clutter of everyday living. Outside, leaves shimmered along the trees that lined the street, their branches catching the wind and rustling in a rhythm as old as the town itself. The breeze carried faint echoes, a log shifting on a hearth, the invisible pull of life starting again in a world still waking. As the assassin walked on, he noticed these details not as threats, but as reassuring signs that all was as it should be. In the market square, strips of pale cloth hung from lines, fluttering overhead and catching the dawn's golden light like sails at rest. The trees at the edge of the square bent lightly, branches bowing as if in greeting to passers-by. Somewhere nearby, the brittle rattle of dried leaves filled a small courtyard, drawing the gaze of a curious cat before it retreated under a porch. The assassin paused beneath an overhang, letting the current of air pass over him. Its cool touch brushed against his face, easing the heat that clung to the heavy cloak, and awakening his senses just a bit more. He watched as a woman reached out to secure her curtain from the breeze, her movements patient and practiced, her face framed by the soft fabric. Around him, the town stirred gently, the play of wind and light bringing motion to even the quietest corners, blending all things, the living, the stillness, the hope of the new day, into a single, tranquil moment. A deep quiet held the little streets, the kind of hush that settles before the world remembers to speak. Only the softest sounds threaded through the calm. A trio of birds chattering on a distant rooftop, their song brief and bright, then fading into the gentle silence. Here and there a shutter creaked as it was fastened against the breeze, the metallic note echoing like a bell. The assassin's footfalls were barely more than whispers on the cobblestones, careful and unhurried, fading neatly into the hush, as though the stones themselves had learned this early hour's secret. Somewhere in the distance, a wooden cart's wheel thudded softly as a vendor moved through another alley, but even that motion was slow and patient, as if the whole town agreed to wake together in a quiet, unspoken rhythm. He moved along the side of a house, pausing beneath the protection of its overhanging eaves. The air was thick with stillness, shaped only by the faint clack of his boots and the sudden flutter of wings as a blackbird darted into a tree. The assassin listened as the quiet pressed around him, sharpened by the subtle notes of life, an unseen sparrow rustling in the ivy, a gentle sigh of wind, the distant, steady drip of water from a rooftop. These were sounds that promised peace rather than warning, anchoring him to a rare sense of safety within the liminal morning. He took a steady breath, letting the quiet settle in his chest and guide his movements. Each gentle sound became a small assurance that in this hour nothing urgent called him, and nothing threatened the fragile stillness holding the town in its delicate hands. The world, for now, was little more than birdsong, softly measured steps and peace. In one modest cottage tucked just beyond the square, a small household began to wake beneath the hush of dawn. A child stirred quietly from the woven mat placed low beside the hearth, rubbing sleep from gentle eyes and blinking up at the dust motes caught in the morning's first light. The world inside the cottage felt still and safe, warmed by the remnants of last night's coals, and watched over by the soft flutter of a curtain at the window. The child moved without words, careful not to disturb those still lost in dreams. A mother's slow breathing, the faded murmur of a sibling turned toward the wall. Every motion was tender, wrapped in the patience of a home that knew the value of quiet beginnings. A small hand retrieved a wooden bowl for water, feet pressed firmly on packed earth as if to steady uncertain dreams from the night before. Outside, the world called softly, yet the household kept its silence, the air holding a sacred gentleness that shaped every action. The mother, hearing the faint shuffle and drawn by motherly instinct, opened her eyes without a sound, her gaze finding the child moving across the room. She offered a drowsy smile that traveled further than words, a gesture that soothed lingering worries and set the shape of the day to come. The father turned in his sleep, but did not wake, comforted by the sense of safety that rested over the home like another soft blanket. The child poured water into the basin, the gentle splash, no more disruptive than rain on a far-off roof. As the child washed and the mother reached to smooth the blanket, they carried out this quiet routine as if participating in a ritual as old as morning itself. Together, they honored the silence, giving thanks in small, wordless ways for the peace of an undisturbed dawn, and for the gentle arc of another day beginning in safety. Down a quiet lane just beyond the first stirrings of the market, the assassin moved with a practiced ease shaped by many years in shadow. His steps were neither rushed nor slow, seeming almost to fold into the stillness around him rather than disturb it. In the pale wash of dawn, the edges of his dark cloak caught gold, where the sun slipped through, painting his outline against the hush of stone and timber. One hand remained tucked below the folds, fingertips just brushing the cool leather hilt of a dagger hidden against his ribs. The other rested softly at his side, relaxed and unthreatening, moving only when needed to lift the hem of his cloak as he stepped neatly over a puddle or uneven stone. His breath was calm, each inhale measured as though he counted heartbeats with the rise and fall of his chest. He ducked his head beneath a low eave, a small gesture that made his passage almost invisible, part of the gentle rhythm of the morning itself. He paused near a narrow gate, taking in the household coming to life across the lane, a child's small shuffle, the lazy stretch of a mother smoothing her blanket, the faint slosh of water in a wooden bowl. His eyes followed the slow movement within the cottage, the ordinary peace of these motions drawing out something soft behind his guarded features. For a moment he allowed himself the comfort of standing perfectly still, listening to the sparse birdsong and the distant beginnings of footsteps in the market. With a reserved, neutral expression, he adjusted the cloak at his shoulders, ensured each bit of fabric sat just so, and then let his gaze linger on the play of morning light as it moved through the curling mist. Each detail he noted became part of a larger pattern, a map made not of streets or targets, but of the small, patient motions that defined the world's waking hours. In the gentle silence, his presence was both singular and unseen, a figure shaped by careful habit, alert, patient, and quietly woven into the tender unfolding of the day. The town stretched out in a gentle tangle of narrow lanes and close-set wooden cottages, each one pressed tightly to its neighbor, as if sharing warmth. Here, the world was distinctly urban, but not in the way of loud crowds or stone palaces. This was a place defined by texture and closeness. Streets weaved in a winding pattern, sometimes little more than footpaths pressed between timbered walls and small fenced gardens. Rooftops formed a patchwork of red and brown, some thick with moss, others dusted in the gold of morning light. Each building bore the quiet marks of those who lived within, tool marks on beams, faded painted symbols above doorways, lengths of laundry strung overhead, fluttering gently in the breeze. A river edged the far side of the town, its banks lined with willow trees, their reflections trembling softly in the moving water. Life here flowed between the boundaries of stone, wood, and water. Small market squares were scattered throughout, always full of baskets, barrels, and the lingering sense of yesterday's bread or fruit past its prime. Chickens scratched in little yards, while cats patrolled fence tops, slipping easily between public and private spaces. The fields and wild green hills beyond were just visible from the higher windows, hints of open space, but always at a distance. This was a place for people and their rituals. Dawn brought the sound of wood being chopped, windows opening, and doorways swept clean. In the early hours, the only strangers were the wind and those, like the assassin, who slipped between the edges of attention, moving along the shaded lines where the city's life met the silence before day. Within these walls, in this cluster of life shaped by centuries, every home, path, and stone carried the memory of countless mornings, awake and bustling long before the countryside had even shaken the dew from its grass. The town awoke layer by layer, each corner brimming with small, tactile stories. Wooden beams along the houses were grooved and scarred from years of use, their age softened by streaks of moss and lichen that traced patterns down the grain like quiet rivers. When a stray breeze passed, it caught at hanging laundry, lifting worn linen shirts and woolen trousers, so they fluttered like hopeful flags along the lane. The stone cobbles beneath every step were uneven, some slick with morning dew, others made rough by the slow, silent crumbling of time. Here and there, shallow puddles reflected the patchwork of rooftops overhead, catching fragments of clouds and the odd leaf drifting down from a rooftop gutter. In low doorways, old iron hinges shone dully, rubbed to a quiet polish by generations of passing hands. The butcher sign, carved from the wood of a felled chestnut tree, swung gently from a wrought iron bracket, announcing its presence with the faintest creak above the stones. Plants pressed up wherever they could, stubborn splashes of green in window boxes, between stones, and in worn clay pots by cottage doors. Cats slunk along garden walls, their fur dusty with pollen, while chickens pecked at the edge of a yard, turning earth that crumbled like brown sugar. From the baker's open window poured the scent of yeast and ash, the promise of fresh loaves, hard crusts softening as the morning wore on. The murmur of early voices grew as neighbors paused to talk in doorways or shared a basket of bruised apples, their hands brushing as they exchanged fruit. At the river's edge, willows bent their delicate fingers into the water, sending gentle ripples across the reflection of sky and timber. Even the market barrels and baskets held their stories, a wooden rim worn smooth by countless fingers, a patch of rope mended with care. In every crack, color, and faded mark, the town lived and remembered, a place as much shaped by the slow work of days as by the hands of its people. The entire town was quietly attuned to the rhythms of preparation, each household moving with intention toward the festival that would soon fill the square. Today's festival was one of the year's happiest events, a day set aside to honor the changing season and the bounty it brought. Windows were being propped open for a better view of the day's parade route, while garlands of wildflowers were woven by patient hands along doorways and market stalls. Children, their cheeks still pink from sleep, gathered sprigs of herbs and petals in small woven baskets to lay along the main lane. Shopkeepers swept their thresholds free of last night's dust, and families set about assembling simple treats: honeyed bread, ripe apples polished and arranged on platters, and fragrant clusters of nuts tucked in little bags. Even the faintest, oldest corners of the town seemed to flicker awake with purpose, the promise of music and shared stories crackling softly in the air. The assassin, though set apart by trade and habit, was not untouched by this gentle anticipation. As he moved through familiar routes, he noticed the way people's hands worked, with extra care, laughter coming more easily, and small decorations finding their way into everyday spaces. His role was not to join the celebration, but rather to use the day's distractions as cover, slipping inconspicuously through the crowd to deliver a quiet message for a distant merchant. He gleaned details for his task with his usual patience, listening to when the musicians would arrive, marking the moment stalls would be abandoned as townsfolk stepped out to dance. Yet even in his calm, reserved manner, he carried the echo of the festival in the air, the rhythm of hope and tradition filling each street, and the comfort found in knowing that, for today at least, the whole town's heart beat in time with the promise of welcome and warmth. For the assassin, the day's purpose was a quiet task, woven neatly between the festival celebration and the ordinary motions of the townsfolk. His objective was not grand or violent, but simple and precise: deliver a sealed letter to a woman who waited by the willow trees along the riverbank. It would take patience and a careful eye. This was a place where many paths crossed, and the festival's energy could easily obscure a solitary figure or a knowing glance. The assassin moved with his usual calm, noting the changes in the current of people: a knot of musicians laughing as they tuned their instruments, a cluster of children darting between market stalls on errands, a circle of elders setting out benches beneath the arching shade. He wove through these shifting tides as though he walked unnoticed, blending into the gentle expectation, thrumming through every open window and sunlit square. His journey took him across the cobbled market, around vibrant patches of marigolds woven into garlands, and through lanes that now echoed with the low hum of festival melodies. The letter, tucked inside his cloak, pressed lightly against his side, a silent reminder of the trust placed in his discretion. Each step was deliberate, unhurried, never drawing attention, as he paused at the edge of the crowd or beneath the awning of a stall to observe a moment longer before slipping quietly ahead. When he reached the riverbank, the world felt newly hushed, the bustle of the square softened by the rustle of willows and the gentle lap of water against stone. There, among the shifting green shadows, he spotted the woman, her presence marked by a deliberate stillness. He approached with care, making the quiet exchange as natural as offering kindness to a friend passing by. As he stepped away, the letter now in safer hands, he felt the satisfaction of a task completed with the same gentle precision as the town itself: quiet, certain, and part of a larger, unseen rhythm that held the day in its steady embrace. Though his motions appeared smooth and unhurried, a subtle tension wove through every step the assassin took. Beneath the surface of the cheerful day and festival sounds lingered the burden of his role, a quiet pressure resting between his shoulders. He moved with practiced caution, always aware of the letter's weight inside his cloak, his senses attuned to the smallest changes in the world around him. A too long glance from a stranger, the sudden hush of laughter as he passed, a pause in the music at the market's edge. Each detail was catalogued, measured, then allowed to slip gently past. Even the sunlight, warm as it was, threw long shadows and highlighted the careful line he walked between blending in and remaining unseen. He felt every eye on him, imagined or real, and carried the constant knowledge that his task bore consequences beyond the simple exchange of words on paper. At the riverbank, the meeting was brief. A quiet word, a nod, the invisible weight of meanings passed from hand to hand, but the assassin did not let his guard drop. He lingered just long enough to be respectful, and then turned with the same composed restraint, his chest easing only as the distance grew between him and the woman with the letter. For others, the day moved solely in the bright and open, filled with laughter and hope, but he knew the hidden currents that ran beneath the town's surface. Each festival, each exchange, each task brought with it a thin undercurrent of risk and purpose only a few could sense. Still, he held to the discipline that kept him unknown and alive, a weight he had learned to bear, and a quiet tension that reminded him how much depended on the things left unsaid. Even as festival drums and bells rang out behind him and conversation drifted through the emerald air, the assassin carried this balance, part of the world's hope and its shadow, moving forward with the careful grace of one who understood both. At the edge of the square, just beyond the swirl of festival colors and music, the assassin stopped beside a weathered bench beneath the drooping boughs of a willow. He steadied his breath, allowing the rhythm of his surroundings to seep quietly into his conscious focus. With deliberate care, he reached into the depths of his cloak and drew out a small loaf of bread, wrapped in a faded cloth, the kind of simple meal meant to ground and sustain. Kneeling by the trunk, he unwrapped the bread slowly, savoring the texture with his fingers before he tore off a bite-sized piece. He ate in silence, feeling each chew anchor him a little more firmly to the present moment, the muted sweetness of the bread mingling with the gentle scent of willow leaves above. In this brief pause, his senses softened, and he let go of the coiled tension that had shadowed him through the crowd. He watched as sunlight dappling through the willow traced shifting patterns across the dirt in his hand. Birds chattered elsewhere, heedless of secrets or burdens, while the music of the festival played like a distant lullaby. As he ate, he was simply another figure in the morning light, indistinguishable from any other townsperson taking comfort in a quiet meal. Taking his time, he wiped breadcrumbs from his cloak and gathered up the cloth, every movement slow and careful, allowing the world's hurried energy to ebb away. This small ritual, repeated day after day, was his way of touching steadiness, a moment just for himself, stitched seamlessly into the day's fabric before the world's tasks and watchful shadows called him onward once more. Elsewhere in a quiet second-story room above a tradesman's shop, a woman began her morning, much as she had for years. With sunlight just clearing the windowsill, she drew a wooden bowl near and filled it with pale grains, their faint earthy scent rising up. Setting her stone grinder in place, she pressed her palms to its worn surface and turned it with steady, practiced movements. The soft rhythmic rasp of stone against stone became a morning anthem, filling the air with the sense of work begun and comfort promised. As the grains broke and gathered in the bowl, she paused occasionally to brush flour dust from her fingers, watching it drift and settle in gold beams across the room. This simple act, humble, unchanged, was a daily ritual that connected her to the generations who had done the same in the quiet dawns before. Not far from her bench, a younger girl set about her own morning routine, seated before a small mirror framed by driftwood and glass beads. She ran a smooth wooden comb through long, dark hair, guiding every lock in slow, gentle strokes. The comb's teeth passed through with barely a whisper, drawing out the night's tangles as outside the distant clatter of carts and the laughter of festival children drifted in through the half-open window. She took her time, aware of the moment, feeling both the weight and softness of her hair gather into a single braid down her back. The comfort of the action, repeated daily, calmed her nerves and brought a sense of readiness for whatever would unfold. As she tied the braid with a ribbon dyed from last spring's flowers, she glanced toward the window, smiling quietly and let the scent of fresh bread and the promise of celebration fill her heart. These subtle, rhythmic beginnings bound each person to the larger tapestry of the town, uniting them through gentle morning rituals and shared anticipation as a new day unfolded outside their doors. The assassin's hands, deft and lean, moved with a language refined by years of silent work. Every gesture was unhurried but exact, whether tucking the hood a little lower or brushing a single stray crumb from the folds of his cloak. His fingers lingered along the worn leather strap of his satchel, recalling the dozens of times they had fastened and unfastened it in countless light and shadows. When he slipped the letter from its hiding place, he did so with a patient precision that revealed no hesitation, just a smooth motion, a folding of paper, a quiet glance to ensure all was as it should be. Those same hands, when resting at his sides, showed only the faintest creases, but up close, a careful eye might glimpse a callus, a small scar, or a telltale roughened knuckle, each mark a memory of tasks done, burdens carried, promises kept in absolute silence. In another corner of the town, the woman at her grinder revealed her own subtle story through her hands. The skin along her knuckles was soft yet chapped, a testimony to both water and work, and faint lines traced the edges of her palms where tools had long made their home. With every turn of the heavy stone, her fingers adjusted, lifting and guiding with a nimbleness that never faltered. She scattered flour in a practiced arc, and her grip was both gentle and firm as she tipped grain from bowl to grinder. Even the soft brush of her fingertips against her cheek, before tucking an escaped strand of hair, spoke to the rhythm of days spent shaping bread for family and strangers alike. Her hands contained both strength and story, nimble in their skill, worn with honest labor, and so precise that even the smallest dusting of flour or the thinnest ribbon in a young girl's hair would find its place each morning without effort or thought. Through hands like these, the soul of the town was made visible, wordless and true, in every simple gesture. Inside the cottage above the bustling street, space was shaped by necessity, neither cramped nor sprawling, but balanced with careful intention. Wooden beams crossed low overhead, their surfaces burnished by age and by the touch of generations. Walls carried a faint scent of smoke and bread, their surfaces adorned only by a few cherished objects. A woven basket for gathering herbs, a faded scrap of embroidery, a polished stone brought back from the river. The rooms were few and closely connected: kitchen, sleeping nook, and a small room set aside for mending or reflection, each space made warm by the way. Morning sunlight spilled onto worn floorboards. The hearth was the quiet heart, its stones ringed with ashes, but alive with heat, giving each day a sense of renewal. In the evenings, laughter and gentle voices filled these rooms, and in the mornings the silence was gentle, shaped by loving routines that left comfort in their wake. What made the home truly alive was the steady pulse of its daily rhythms, a soul woven from humble rituals and small kindnesses. The cottage was never empty of presence. Each object had a purpose, every corner remembered a story, and even the smallest signs of wear became part of its welcome. Mittens dried neatly over the hearth, shoes rested in rows beneath a sturdy bench, and a tangle of wildflowers in a clay pot brightened the window ledge. Through season after season, the cottage held warmth and weathered trouble, its soul drawn tight by kinship and hard work. It did not pretend grandeur, nor did it seek much from the world outside. It was content to be the keeper of peace, the cradle of beginnings each morning, and the place to which family returned, unburdened and safe. In its walls lingered all the unspoken hopes, hushed comfort, and gentle pride of those who called it home. The cottage walls were built of packed clay, their earthy color softened by the touch of countless hands. In some places they curved gently inward, giving the rooms a sheltering feel, as if the house itself was leaning in to embrace its family. Dried herbs hung in careful bundles from low rafters, lavender for calm, sage for health, rosemary for luck, casting gentle shadows on the plaster and releasing sharp, comforting scents as the air passed through. Near the hearth, a string of onions shared space with a bag of dried beans, while braided garlic kept watch above the kitchen door. Jugs of water waited on a sturdy table, their clay walls beaded with condensation, and a woven mat protected the floor from muddy shoes. Everything felt chosen, useful, and quietly beautiful. Even the old wooden pegs along the entryway held hats and cloaks with pride, recalling yesterday's warmth and tomorrow's promise. Outside, the narrow stone path traced a crooked line from the stoop to a small gate, its surface uneven and well-trodden, each rock settled into the soil by decades of use. Green moss crept into the cracks between stones, and round river pebbles edged the borders with careful purpose. Potted herbs, mint, thyme, basil, sat clustered near the steps, their leaves bright with dew, while clusters of violets spilled from the foot of the wall. Here and there, the earth was swept clear, making space for a simple wooden bench that caught morning sun. Chickens scratched at the edges, exploring bits of spilled grain, watched over by a lazy cat perched on the low garden wall. The air outside was always full of the gentle sounds of life, the quiet cluck of hens, the soft creak of the gate, the steady rhythm of a broom brushing the path clean. At every turn, the home wore its details like a second skin, each mark, each scent, each stone, a witness to the quiet care that shaped every day. Beyond the clay walls and sunlit stoop, the town itself had begun to wake in gentle stages. Doors creaked open to greet the morning. Distant bells chimed, echoing over the rooftops and drifting low across garden plots. Neighbors exchanged quiet greetings as they stepped outside, baskets in hand, ready for the day's errands and the promise of the coming festival. Smoke began to curl upward from scattered chimneys, its white-hued plumes joining the cool blue of the morning sky. Along the riverbank, fishermen cast their lines with calm precision, their voices muffled by the low mist that hugged the water. Farther up the lane, a horse's hoof struck a soft, even pattern into the packed earth, the scent of hay and leather trailing behind. Even the market, still drowsy and half-shadowed, was starting to fill with the gentle clatter of carts and the scent of ripe fruit. The square, still tender with dawn, grew busier by the minute. Vendors pulled up weather-stained awnings, shaken loose of the night's dampness, and began to lay out their wares in neat rows. Woven baskets, fresh bread, jugs of milk, and bundles of wildflowers, ready to be braided into garlands. Pigeons prowled the cobblestones, pecking crumbs from beneath benches as children darted around them, giggling, their laughter ringing clear and light. Gardeners tended their plots beneath cheerful flags, fluffing their aprons and wiping hands on coarse linen. Bakers leaned against their open windows, arms dusted with flour, trading news across the lane with passing travelers. And threading it all together was the low murmur of voices, questions, welcomes, familiar jokes, all rising and falling like a gentle tide. From each corner, life unfurled at its own pace, as if the world itself had been waiting for this very day to begin, eager to join in the quiet pleasures and small triumphs the morning would bring. As the morning settled deeper into the streets, the quiet paths filled with the gentle presence of townsfolk. Neighbors bundled in shawls passed one another near garden gates, exchanging soft greetings and news of yesterday's bread or a neighbor's ailing hen. Vendors with wide shoulders and burlap aprons rolled their carts along the stony lanes, wheels clicking quietly, the scent of apples and greens trailing in their wake. An old man with a walking stick paused by the community well, resting in the patch of sun that crept slowly up the wall. Children in pairs skipped stones along the path's edge, their laughter softening the edges of the new day. Every movement was unhurried, each encounter touched by kindness and routine. Familiar faces worn gentle by seasons of shared trust and easy conversation. Wanderers moved through this calm, just as naturally. A traveling shepherd led his small flock through the lower lane, their bells chiming softly as sheep paused to nibble at the tufts of clover by a narrow ditch. A woman from a distant village, with a basket of dyed wool over one arm, wove past market stalls, humming quietly as she searched for fragrant herbs to bring home. The spice seller nodded to every passerby, his hands busy arranging pouches of marjoram and fennel, lingering in the cool shadow of the bakery's wall. All around, the gentle flow of people wove stories in real time, vivid, ordinary, and unremarkable, except for how they form the fabric of everyday life. Through this tapestry walked the assassin, silent and nearly invisible, his steps matched to the gentle pace of the morning, and his presence lost among those simply carrying in the day. Each face and gesture added to the town's living memory, a procession of neighbors, vendors, and wanderers sharing the kindness of a peaceful start, as if the day itself was a secret worth preserving. As the crowd flowed gently through the square, a sudden hush drew the assassin's focus upward. On the angled eave of an old bakery, a single sparrow hopped along the tiles, shaking loose a flurry of dust and crumbs. Its tiny claws danced from shadow to sunlight, the brown and gold of its feathers glowing with each hop. The bird cocked its head, stilled for a heartbeat, then fluttered to a low branch that framed the shop's door, stirring the fresh green leaves so they whispered together. The leaves trembled and glimmered in the sunlight, each movement slow and bright, while the sparrow took up its song, a thin, hopeful thread that wove neatly through the morning noise and anchored the assassin for a quiet moment. The gentle beauty of these small things, always present but often missed, filled the air with calm. Beneath the shade from the baker's awning, a stray shadow flickered along the cobbles, just a wisp at first, then the fuller shape of a neighbor passing on the far side of the lane. Rustling leaves carried the sound of footsteps, soft and sure, blending with the deeper sigh of the wind in the willows near the river's bend. The assassin paused, letting the world settle around him, the sharp alertness of his calling softened for now by the simple rhythm of rustling foliage and shifting sunlight. He closed his hand gently around the fold of his cloak as another leaf tumbled past, spinning slowly in the mild breeze before landing with a hush at his boot. For a breath or two, all tension lifted. There was only the pulse of quiet movement, feathers, shadows, leaves, marked by acceptance and gentle patience, as if nature itself had paused to observe the morning with him. As the sun climbed higher, light began to layer itself across the world in new and changing hues. The cobblestones, once blue with the last shreds of early morning mist, now glowed honey gold, each stone stamped bright against the deepening shadows under carts and benches. The bakery's ochre walls caught the sunlight and softened into warm peach, while the market canopy flickered with shifting colors. Emerald in the folds of old linen, crimson where a bolt of wool caught the light, and splashed yellow atop piles of fresh apples. Higher still, the wooden beams of the cottages shed their dusky brown for a kind of living amber, gleaming where the sun had worked its way between roof tiles. Window panes sprinkled dots of rainbow on the dusty floorboards inside, and even the humble clay pots beneath the sills looked richer, more alive, sparking as the light gathered force. With each passing minute, every color in view seemed to shift and breathe, painting the town in gentle motion. Green from the willow leaves deepened above the water's edge, their reflections dancing in patches of silver and teal on the river below. The festival flowers strung across the baker's stall gleamed vividly, violet and coral and white, their petals nearly transparent in the new sun. Clothes hung on garden lines shimmered from lavender to bone, softened by a breeze that carried light and scent alike. Even the assassin's cloak, once nearly indistinguishable in the gray dawn, gained new definition. Its folds showed tones of earthy brown and olive along the seams, blending in and out of the patchwork shadows at his feet. With each change in light, the town became a living painting, each corner, each face, each window embracing the warmth and clarity of the day's arrival, inviting everything and everyone into a peaceful golden fullness. Beneath the calm flow of the morning's routines, a memory drifted just below the assassin's careful composure, surfacing and fading again like a shadow beneath rippling water. As he watched the crowd shifting with the brightening sun, he recalled another festival, years ago, when the laughter had sounded like hope instead of warning. He remembered a promise made in a different town, his hand warm on the shoulder of a friend whose trust was now a thing of the past. The memory colored his present with an undertone of longing, not for the lost friendship alone, but for a time when his role in the world was less hidden, when his footsteps had not been measured or masked by the burden of secrets. That flicker lingered, sweet and pained, never fully gone, even as he nodded to a vendor and melted once more into the calm hum of the waking day. For many in the cottage and in the town, a quiet worry came and went with equal subtlety, stitched into the hem of their ordinary work. The woman spinning grain at her grinder paused now and then, glancing at the window, as if expecting some news or remembering a day when the clouds had gathered without warning. Even the young girl, tying her hair in its neat braid, wondered if her father would return from the fields before the festival parade reached the square. These small, persistent worries, rarely spoken aloud, rested beneath smiles, threading through mundane gestures and patient chores. Yet, in the way each person continued through their routine, there was strength, an understanding that memory and worry might visit, but both would pass, softened by the shared presence of loved ones, and the steady glow of another gentle morning. The routines would shelter them, giving shape and comfort even as old fears flickered in the shadows, outshone by the warm, steady promise of the new day. As the day continued to unfold with gentle certainty, the assassin found his mind wandering to a story told in childhood, back when he was less cautious and more easily delighted. Around a smoky fire, an elder once spoke of a white stag that ventured into the fields only when the world was balanced, when there was peace, and every neighbor felt hope in their hearts. The tale was offered not as a lesson but as something like a charm, meant to inspire courage and patience for days that felt heavy or full of waiting. He wondered, slipping through the festival's shifting laughter and color, if the white stag would be seen today, with so much happiness sown through the air. Or perhaps it was only for those rare, unburdened mornings, when childhood was still a warm memory, and the world's dangers lived only within stories. Elsewhere, seated on a sun-worn step outside her home, the woman who turned the grinder dreamed quietly between tasks. She imagined her children grown and strong, their faces lit by the golden light cast through the window, safe from hunger and sorrow. The hope lingered around her as she dusted her hands on her apron, a wish as fragile as it was bright. Across the courtyard, the young boy watched pigeons peck at crumbs and wondered in silence what secrets his father carried home each evening. Questions he had never voiced, sheltered by love but edged by curiosity. These gentle dreams and silent questions lived side by side, with daily chores and festival preparations, woven together into the fabric of the morning, in the same way sunlight wove its way through the leaves. With every story remembered, every dream imagined, and every wordless wonder, the town prepared itself for another day, holding fast to hopes both spoken and unspoken, as ancient and familiar as the dawn itself. With the world humming softly around him, the assassin paused just beneath the dappled light of a willow, letting his shoulders rest as the quiet of morning pressed in. There was no pressing task now, no coded glance or urgent footfall, just a space to breathe, where he could let the scents and sounds of waking life fill his senses. His eyes traced the ripples in the river nearby, the way sun scattered gold across each crest, and the slow-moving shadows of clouds that barely disturbed the surface. The festival's music drifted lightly from the square, a distant warmth rather than a call, and for a long moment he remained still, content neither to remember nor to plan, simply to exist in the calm he so seldom allowed himself to feel. He let the gentle rhythm of the town draw near, the steady hush holding him quietly in place, wrapped in the fullness of the new day. Elsewhere others found their own pauses, a grandmother leaning in her doorway, her hands loosely clasped, eyes closed for a single breath of sunlight. A young boy on the path stopping mid-stride to feel the coolness of dew through his sandals. A baker resting against his window, face uplifted to the sky, flour dust gleaming along his jaw. No words were spoken, no reason given for these moments stolen from the day. Instead, each person surrendered briefly to the gentle tide of feeling. Gratitude for peace, awareness of hope, or the simple joy of presence. The pause was enough to fill every heart with quiet confidence, as if in these wordless instants, the town itself had chosen to honor the small blessings that arrived with morning. Within these silences, the past and the future faded, giving way to the soothing strength of now, a moment of rest before the gentle motion of the day resumed and the sun continued its climb. Within the humble cottage, the small family gathered around a rough-hewn table set with simple fare. Sunlight spilled through the window, painting honeyed squares across their bowls of warm porridge and hunks of coarse bread. The mother ladled out a spoonful for each child, her hands moving with tender precision, while the father divided a small wedge of cheese with a careful smile. Every gesture was quiet, shaped by the unspoken understanding that the first meal of the day did not need laughter or chatter to feel whole. The children ate slowly, bent over their bowls, feet swinging above the swept earth below. Warmth from the hearth enveloped everyone in a gentle cocoon, combining with the sweet smell of cooked oats and the rush of cool morning air drifting in and out as someone slipped through the door. Not far away, in a shaded corner just outside the busy square, An old friend and a wandering merchant shared bread and apples on a bench, softened by years of use. Words were few. Instead, the gentle breaking of bread and the clink of a knife on fruit echoed softly between them. The assassin, passing quietly along the lane, watched as hands offered and accepted nourishment. The trust in these small exchanges more telling than any story. A sense of quiet gratitude hung in the air, for company, for safety, for the promise of a day that began with kindness tucked inside every mouthful. The town itself seemed to honor the shared meal, holding its collective breath in a moment of calm before the gentle tide of voices, footsteps, and song would rise again. In that warmth, everyone who partook, family, friend, stranger, felt restored and welcome, the whole world briefly united by sharing, silence, and the gentle light of morning's peace. Beyond the quiet circle of breakfast, the town's morning chorus became more lively with each moment. The market stalls thrummed with new energy as vendors called invitations to sample their freshest wares, ripe pears, honeycomb, and rounds of cheese cut and offered from their wheels. Animals added their voices to the medley. Hens clucked and scratched in the dusty alleys. A rooster announced himself atop a fence, and a pair of goats argued softly over a patch of wildflowers near the bakery's wall. Someone brushed by leading a sleepy horse toward the river, the gentle rhythm of its hooves underscoring the melody of street musicians tuning lutes and fiddles. The smells of yeast, roasting nuts, and cured meat mingled on the air, carried swiftly through the winding lanes by a playful, steady wind. Fabric banners fluttered above the square, their bright colors dancing on the breeze as children darted between stalls in a game of chase. The pigeons, never far behind, flapped noisily from windowsill to market awning in pursuit of stray crumbs, their wings sending little gusts through the yard. Neighbors paused mid-errand to trade news in cheerful tones or examine bunches of wildflower garlands, hands busy and faces open with anticipation. Every sound, every scent, and every movement layered together, filling the morning with promise and connecting every soul in a gentle, living tapestry. Within this steady hum, the assassin blended and moved quietly, yet the life around him pressed close, as if the rhythm of the town itself carried him along, its chorus bright, its breath carried on the wind, and its happiness woven into every corner, alive with the start of a new day. In the swirl of market life, words and laughter floated easily from stall to stall, yet tucked behind a cluster of sunburned apples, two old friends paused their gentle exchange and let the morning hush wrap around them. One, with silver at her temples, rested her hand atop the other's, a silent gesture that spoke of years, shared and comfort offered, more powerful than any phrase. With the simplest of smiles, she leaned in and finally whispered, "Peace to your day." The words were little more than breath, softened further by the warm air, and swallowed by the nearby song of a lute. In that small moment, the entire world seemed to fall quiet, tuned to the music of connection and the trust that bloomed between people in these pauses. The assassin, weaving gently through the crowd, caught only the echo of the words, if he caught them at all. For his part, he moved with quiet intent, never needing to announce himself or break the spell of the morning. His interactions were marked by gentle nods or the briefest meeting of eyes, small acknowledgments that belonged more to the language of silence than speech. When a baker offered him a slice of bread, he simply accepted, holding the warmth of it for a moment longer in his hands before moving on, grateful in his own quiet way. The town around him buzzed with its festival energy, but these quiet, nearly wordless exchanges carried just as much weight as the songs, the laughter, and the morning's clamor. In every small silence, kindness and understanding found their place, helping to steady the hearts of all who lived beneath the rising sun. Near the hearth in the cottage, the mother performed a gentle ritual she'd learned from her own grandmother, folding the family's linens for the day's festival. She worked in the soft pool of morning light, her movements slow and exact, smoothing each cloth on her knee before creasing it with the side of her palm. Each fold had meaning, a wish for warmth, for peace, for good fortune on a day when the whole town celebrated together. With every careful press, she murmured a blessing under her breath, letting hopeful words slip into the fabric itself. Once she paused and held a length of embroidered linen close, pressing her lips gently to the threadwork, as if sealing a secret message for the day ahead. The folded cloths became a small stack of comfort, ready to be carried to the square, where families would feast and memories would be made. Elsewhere, In the quiet corner of a shop, an elder traced a finger along the carved lintel of the entryway, pausing at each worn symbol. The markings told the story of the shop's founding, a protection against misfortune, a remembrance of those who built with their hands and held the space safe for neighbors and kin. The elder's touch was slow and reverent, fingers following the shape of the marks as sunlight washed across the wood. For a breath, the old tradition drew others near. An apprentice watched, respectfully silent. A small child leaned close, wide-eyed, caught between curiosity and awe. With the tracing complete, the elder nodded once, satisfied that the day would begin beneath the watchful blessings of ancestors. Customs like these, quiet, deliberate, hardly noticed by those rushing past, stitched every day to the ones before, grounding the town in the shared memory and gentle magic of its people. While the festival bells sounded through the square, the mother set out a dish that had traveled through generations. Herbed barley stew, slow-cooked and rich, with the scent of rosemary, thyme, and wild garlic gathered from familiar hillsides. She ladled the thick, steaming broth into clay bowls, each one worn smooth by years of use, and tucked a slice of coarse rye bread at the saucer's edge. The stew's recipe was older than anyone at the table. Each family had added its own touch, an extra root or a firmer grain, but the base always remained the same. As the first taste warmed her tongue, the mother thought of grandmothers who had stirred the same pot, their voices echoing in remembered snippets of lullabies and quiet instructions passed down at dusk. This simple meal spoke not just of hunger sated, but of a care woven generation by generation, tying together past, present, and future at a single wooden table. As others found their way to the meal, a quiet respect humbled the gathering. Children peeled herbs carefully from their bread, listening to elders recall the way ancestors stored roots for lean winters or coaxed sweetness from bitter greens. Even the youngest paused long enough to notice how the stew's flavor changed from one season to the next, shaped by the land and the hands that harvested its bounty. The food was more than sustenance. It was living memory, flavored with stories that required no extra salt. By sharing the meal, every heart claimed its place in a lineage centuries deep, comforted by the knowledge that new voices would one day stir the same pot. The bowls gradually emptied, but the sense of fullness lingered, rich with gratitude and belonging, as laughter and the distant sound of festival music wrapped around the table and drifted into the golden morning light. Spread across the little table, every object spoke of the town's deep-rooted traditions and the simple artistry of daily life. Wooden bowls, smooth and dark from years of meals, each bore a unique grain spiraling beneath the simple stew. Spoons, their handles carved with faded patterns of leaves and vines, fit comfortably in every hand, warm to the touch and shaped by time. A small pitcher carved from maple and wrapped in thin bands of woven reed for easy carrying, held fresh milk just pulled from the morning's pail. At the center of the table, a deep woven basket brimmed with nuts and apples, its edges spun tight with willow branches and reinforced by careful hands. Even the salt was kept in a lidded box of chestnut wood, its dark sheen highlighted with every pass beneath the sunlit window. Nearby, a pair of low stools stood ready, their seats fashioned from braided rushes and legs worn slick where small feet had dangled over countless seasons. A sturdy bench took pride of place beneath the wall, brass tacks gleaming where the upholsterer had carefully hammered them in long ago. By the hearth rested a bellows of stitched leather and polished brass, kept within reach for coaxing reluctant flames. Hanging from a wooden peg, a market satchel woven from flax swung gently with the movement of air, holding the promise of ripe berries or a clutch of eggs. All around, tiny details, smooth basket handles, hammered brass pins on a breadboard, the knotted ends of a woolen table runner, told stories only hands could remember. Through these humble, lasting objects, the household carried the memory of all who had come before, ensuring that every bite, every gesture, and every new day was cradled in the care and craft of generations past. As the family settled in for their meal, a quiet dance of small rituals intertwined with every movement. Before the first spoon dipped into the barley stew, the youngest child traced a tiny circle above the bowl, just as her grandmother had taught her, a circle whispered to keep misfortune from the table. The mother, without thinking, knocked lightly on the wooden bench 3 times, following an old belief that it would keep wandering spirits at bay. The father slipped a bit of bread beneath the table before taking his first bite, a humble offering to the house's guardian spirit, as was customary whenever a festival day began. These gestures were humble and nearly invisible, folded gently into the fabric of their daily habits, and passed down with lullabies, stories, and gentle reminders etched in the quiet hours before dawn. Out in the square, similar customs played out in their own subtle ways. A market vendor tucked a sprig of rosemary behind her ear, believing it would bring her luck and ward off ill intentions from rival sellers or fickle customers. An elder merchant, seeing a black cat slip beneath his stall, murmured a blessing and scattered a pinch of salt across his windowsill, his motions barely noticed by the morning crowd. Even the children, carrying baskets of herbs for decoration, paused at the threshold of the baker's shop, pressing their palms to the wooden lintel, a habit said to bring good fortune for the year to come. Each gesture, whether born out of faith or the echo of old fears, carried a little weight, as if the people of the town held the invisible threads of their ancestors close, weaving protection and hope into every step of the day. They did not question these acts. The belief was in the doing, and the gestures brought meaning and comfort as naturally as the turning of the morning sun. As the sun arched higher and the town's earlier bustle turned to a gentle hum, shadows began to stretch across the worn cobblestones. The square, once filled with restless movement and flashes of morning color, softened as sunlight slipped behind the ridge of the nearby hills. The shade from tall market awnings grew long, sweeping patchwork lines along the ground and hiding the feet of vendors as they shifted crates and baskets. Children who had darted eagerly through sunlit patches now wandered toward the shadow, their play slowing under the comfort of cooler air. In the closed courtyards, trailing vines and laundry lines cast slender bars across doorsteps and benches, moving softly with the breeze and marking the steady passage of time. The once brilliant banners faded into muted hues, their shadows blurring on the walls, and for a while, everything seemed to lean into the heart of the day, as if the whole town were pausing for breath. Inside the cottage, shadows crept into corners, swallowing up the gold of morning and replacing it with the soft hush that comes after a meal. The family lingered at the table, their voices low, eyes following the slow swing of sunlight, fading along the floor. Drowsiness settled over the youngest, eyes fluttering as she watched beams slide away from her favorite doll, now half in, half out of the gloom. The mother gathered up the bowls, careful not to disturb the gentle quiet, and stepped lightly over lengths of shadow curling across the hearth. Beyond the open window, the wind seemed to hush, its cool currents slipping softly through the room and stirring the edges of folded linens. Across the world, market, riverbank, kitchen, the stretching shadows offered a signal understood without words. It was the hour for rest, reflection, and a moment's peace before the light shifted once more and the afternoon invited everyone back into its gentle flow. With the afternoon shadows stretched long, the quiet anticipation of the day gathered at the cottage's worn doorstep. The sound of footsteps approached, soft, deliberate, but carrying a purpose distinct from festival bustle. A slender, dust-covered boy appeared in the doorway, his arms full with a tightly wrapped bundle of firewood and a cloth parcel marked with the baker's seal. He tipped his head in greeting, then set the bundle down near the hearth, where the warmth from earlier meals still lingered in the stone. The mother offered him a tired smile, pressed a copper coin into his palm, and watched as he melted back into the sunlight, a line of dust tracing where he had been. The parcel, when unwrapped, revealed bread still warm to the touch and a small wedge of cheese, a quiet satisfaction, a promise that the house would not go hungry as the evening drew near. Out in the square, the assassin's own task, so deeply woven with secrecy, had long since come to its quiet conclusion. His steps were now lighter, his focus drifting gently from sharp vigilance to the contented noticing of simple things. The way a fresh market cart glowed in the slant of afternoon sun, or how a woman hummed softly as she swept the steps of her shop. From the deep pocket of his cloak, he withdrew a small keepsake, a token given after his message was safely delivered, turning it between his fingers and feeling the grounding presence of a job well done. Nearby, vendors closed up their stalls and gathered their last offerings into baskets, while the scent of roasting chestnuts slipped along the narrowing lanes. The sense of completion, the unhurried flutter of spent energy, wrapped itself around every gesture as the village, slow and sure, turned toward the gentle labors of evening. In the waning light, there was space to rest in the peaceful satisfaction of an ordinary task, finished with care. With the sun dipping low and painting each rooftop with gold, the rhythm of homecoming began across the village. Children returned in gleeful pairs, their faces smudged with dust and berry stains, laughter trailing as they tumbled through garden gates. Their small hands carried treasures found in alleyways, an odd feather, a shiny pebble, a flower drooping but bright. From the fields beyond the cottages, workers trudged home with sleeves rolled and heads thrown back in relief, trading quiet words and tired grins as they neared familiar doorways. Wheels of empty carts rattled over the stones as tradesmen guided their tools and goods to rest for the night. Even the clamor of distant bells softened as the square slowly emptied. The day's festival noises replaced by the shared, gentle cadence of reunion. Elders followed, leaning slow and steady on canes or arms, pausing often to greet neighbors and to watch dusk gather in the folds of the lanes. The warmth of return lit each threshold, old boots tucked beside new ones, scarves lifted from hooks, the weight of time and absence eased by the closeness of home. In kitchens and courtyards, doors lingered open a moment longer, welcoming stray breezes and missing voices back where they belonged. The evening air hummed with gratitude and tired content as every household took stock. Children counted, bread sliced, hands washed, stories blooming anew across tables. Soft lantern light and the aroma of supper invited the weary, the young, and the wise alike to gather within walls that seemed to breathe easier for each one's return. The world outside felt quieter, but within each home, life pulsed just a little brighter, knotted together in the simple joy of coming back. As evening settled over the town, the heat of the day slid quietly away, leaving a gentle coolness in its wake. The last sunlight glimmered on the stone walls, turning them pale with a hiss of amber, before shadows softened every edge. Roofs and chimneys, once hot to the touch, lost their warmth and began to hold onto the cool hush, drifting down from the high hills. The cobblestones that had radiated summer's steady pulse now felt smooth and chill beneath sandaled feet. Along the lane, the smell of sun-baked earth faded to something softer, green leaves and cold water from the river, mingling where the first hints of night curled in the air. Windows stood open a little longer, letting the new coolness flow gently through kitchens and rooms. Neighbors leaned into doorways, their voices grown soft and low in the shifting breeze. Above it all, the sky transformed with a slow, silent grace. The sharp blue of afternoon deepened, tinged with streaks of apricot and coral in the west, while to the east, a purple hush gathered where the hills met the horizon. Clouds stretched in thin gold strips, catching fire for a few final moments before yielding to dusk, and the first star kindled high above the gables, a faint, hopeful pinprick. Lanterns began to glow in gardens and windows, each one multiplying that small, shimmering light. The town seemed to exhale as the colors changed, the rush of the day replaced by an easy cadence shaped by cooling air and the promise of rest. Children's laughter rippled one last time across the square, trailing into the soft sweep of evening. And in kitchens and along winding paths, families watched the sky, grateful for the quiet beauty that marked the gentle end of another day. As dusk settled deeper, the gentle clatter of evening preparations began inside every home. In the cottage, the mother knelt by the hearth, stacking the day's last bundle of split oak and kindling atop the old embers. With practiced motions, she breathed life into the flame, cupping her hand near the spark, coaxing the first curl of smoke in the soft orange glow from dry twigs. The children, gathered close with bowls and woolen wraps, watched as each log caught fire, the room slowly filling with the promise of warmth. Shadows danced along the walls while the aroma of wood smoke wove through the air and mingled with the scents of herbs and simmering broth. It was a ritual enacted with quiet satisfaction, for fire meant comfort, the ease of warmth in a cooling world, and the knowledge that a simple meal would soon be shared by those gathered together. In kitchens and courtyards up and down the lane, similar scenes took shape. A father fanned his own small fire in a stone oven, checking the coals with a careful hand, before turning a skillet of onions and carrots, their sweetness rising in the growing heat. Outside, lanterns and torches kindled as neighbors gathered, each flame flickering against the oncoming dark and holding back the night's first chill. Even the older folk, resting on worn benches with shawls draped about their shoulders, drew closer to the steady warmth of an outdoor brazier tucked beside the stoop. The gentle crackle of logs, the sting of smoke and cool air, and the sight of firelight reflected in embers and in eyes, all of it marked the town's quiet shift. As the skies faded to deep velvet, the fires inside and out wove a quilt of comfort for every soul, a simple chorus of light and heat. One more promise kept as the day closed, and evening's gentle hush embraced the world. As the violet dusk settled gently outside, the eldest daughter took up the task of fetching water. With a well-worn wooden bucket swinging from her hand, she slipped out the door and down the familiar path. The evening breeze tugged her hair as she passed garden beds and willow trees, whose branches seemed to bow in the softening light. At the well, she filled the bucket slowly, listening to the rhythmic drips and the distant murmur of neighbors bidding each other good night. Her walk back was measured, careful not to spill a drop, the cool weight grounding her in the peace that settles over the village at day's end. When she returned, the cottage glowed with firelight, and her mother met her with a nod. No words needed, just the silent exchange of effort and thanks that marked their evenings together. Inside, with the hush of night beginning to shape the world, the water was poured across the brick floor, darkening the red clay in wide, clean arcs. The mother took a broom and, with steady, patient strokes, swept the day's dust and worry outside. Each motion was both chore and comfort, a catharsis to erase footprints of muddy boots, scattered crumbs from hurried hands, and the stray particulates drifted in through open windows. The children, now quiet, watched as the embers cast shadows that swayed each time the broom swung by. With every pass, the house seemed to breathe more easily, preparing for rest. The simple act of cleaning, done at the close of every day, set the cottage in order and gave the night its own gentle beginning. A world wiped clean, ready for sleep, stories, and the needed quiet that comes after honest labor is done. As true night gathered, the closing ritual began with the soft thud of shutters pulled gently against the chill. One by one, the family moved from window to window, pressing wooden frames tight until the wind and darkness stayed politely outside. Hands moved with well-practiced care, fastening latches, tucking loose lengths of cloth against lonely drafts. The last gold traces of firelight shone out briefly into the lane, then disappeared, leaving the cottage wrapped in a quiet, protective hush. For a moment, those inside paused, feeling the cool air soften as it tangled with the warmth within. The world beyond faded to a soft blur, marked only by the distant music of the festival winding down and the gentle flicker of lanterns, now private beacons for each hearth, and each heart returned home. Outside, the youngest daughter took up her lamp and crossed the garden path to the small animal shed, its timbers sweet with sun-warmed hay and the scent of gentle fur. She found the chickens nestled close on their perch, their sleepy clucks faint in the dark, and the barn cat curled tight in a corner, tail flicking as she checked in. One by one, she closed the cog gate's latch and spread a little extra straw across the floor. Whispering a good night to each creature, she lingered, a moment at the door, listening to the soft, steady breathing, before turning the lamp down low and drawing the bolt. As she made her way back inside, the air was alive with a sense of safety and the deep peace that comes from closing the day with care. For every window secured and every animal tucked in was another small promise, kept stitched into the heart of a quiet village night. As the house settled into its evening quiet, soft voices lingered like the gentle warmth of embers in the hearth. The family gathered close, trading small stories and quiet laughter, their words rising and falling just above the crackling of the fire. The father asked about the day's festival, and the children recounted their favorite sights: bright banners, the music of fiddles, a friendly dog that stole a roll from a distracted baker. The mother hummed in agreement, adding her own memory of the village green glittering under lanterns, the echoes of footsteps and music carrying into the blue dusk. Shadows flickered gently along the walls, the slow cadence of the conversation and the hush between each reply stitching an invisible thread of contentment through the room. Even as voices trailed off, Smiles and shared glances said just as much, coloring the quiet with the fullness of belonging. In the gentle dark beyond the door, the world seemed to lean in and listen. Each room held a sliver of the conversation, words drifting down the hallway, laughter tucked in the corners, warmth in the pause before a reply. At the hearth, the oldest daughter promised to show her brother how to braid wildflowers, their plans whispered, as though petals themselves might crumble if spoken too loud. The mother's voice softened at the edge of sleep, her final wish, a hope for good dreams, spoken low enough to blend with the wind outside. For a time there was nothing but the hush of voices, the sound of breath and the familiar creak of the cottage settling for the night. These last small exchanges, spoken without hurry or worry, became a shield against the dark. Invisible memories stitched lightly between walls, a gentle blessing on the close of another safe, ordinary day. As true night closed over the village, lamps were kindled room by room, their golden light blooming softly, like stars gathered close to earth. The small flames flickered inside glass and brass, casting halos on the wooden beams overhead and sending gentle rays deep into every corner. In the kitchen, a single lamp illuminated the table, its glow warming the faces gathered there and turning bowls and spoons into silhouettes against the hush. Each hallway, alcove, and nook gained its own small sun, drawing shadows that danced tenderly across embroidered linens and well-worn chairs. The collective glow knit the home together, each lamp a beacon that promised comfort, rest, and safety beneath the cover of darkness, a constellation spun entirely from love and care. Outside, the village seemed darker for the gentle brilliance inside each home. Travelers out late glimpsed the lights through snug window panes and took comfort, knowing the warmth of supper and family awaited just within reach of the next doorstep. The world was quiet now, save for the soft night wind and the rare, far-off call of an owl. Inside, the lamps glowed as hopes and memories, steady and unwavering, while the last chores were finished and beds prepared for sleep. In their tender light, children's eyelids grew heavy, elders relaxed their worn hands, and every heart was gently stilled by the certainty of belonging. Each lamp, a single star on earth, shone until the last word faded, and the hush of peace grew wide enough to cradle every dream, carrying the village safely through another tranquil night. With the last chores finished and quiet falling over the rooms, the mother began to hum a tune she remembered from her own childhood. The melody was simple, no words needed, just a gentle, winding thread of sound that drifted warmly through the kitchen into the smaller corners of the home. Her voice blended with the low crackle of the hearth, the creak of floorboards beneath resting feet, and the soft clink of dishes stacked from morning. The children listened, eyes half-lidded, lulled by the familiar comfort of their mother's quiet song. Nearby, the father exhaled a long, tired sigh, the kind that signaled surrender to peace and the willingness to let the work of the day slip quietly away. For a moment, nothing else stirred, as the humming and sighing became the final punctuation to a day, lived fully and gently, with nothing left to rush. Outside, the whole village seemed to release a breath of its own. You could sense the shift in the way lanterns flickered a little less. Windows finally sealed against the night's cool air, and paths fell silent but for the soft pad of a wandering cat returning to the stoop. Leaves no longer rustled, and not even the distant festival music lingered in the dark. In that wide, contented pause, every home, heart, and creature found its own stillness, as if the entire world had inhaled throughout the day and now scattered its cares with a great, slow exhale. The assassin, retreating toward his own quiet corner with steady steps, listened to the hush and let the gentle closing of doors and lull of a mother's song remind him that even the hardest jobs and loneliest walks could end in simple peace. Wrapped in the softness of night and melody, the village settled into dreams, and the exhale of the day carried every living thing toward rest.